Hi Year 8, my name's Mrs Honing. I joined Knole Academy at Easter, so I haven't really met you yet. It's a bit of a strange time for me. I'm doing this PowerPoint for you to help you with your revision for the ecosystem process assessment that's coming up. I am doing this from home and I do have a set of twins, Lorelei and Leo, who are now 9 months old, and you may hear some strange noises as I'm trying to record over them. Hopefully you're ready to start. You need a pen and a piece of paper, and you need to make sure that along the way, if you get to a point where you haven't had enough time, just pause the video and give yourself as much time as you need. Okay, here we go. So the first two PowerPoint slides are a checklist for you, and it asks you to identify whether you're developing or secure or you need extending in the areas that we're going to cover in this revision session. So have a look through, and if you want to print them out, do so. If you can't print them out, just write down the ones that you feel that you need to be looking at. Okay. So something to think about when we talk about photosynthesis, we need to understand how important it is, and is it essential for all life on Earth? So what do we need to know about photosynthesis? Okay, it's the process by which plants make their food. The word equation you will need to know is carbon dioxide and water, and it produces glucose and oxygen. Notice the photosynthesis equation is the direct opposite of the respiration equation. Okay, so as plants give out glucose and oxygen, that's useful to us. It occurs in the chloroplasts of leaves, and this is where the green pigment chlorophyll transfers the energy. Okay, the sun is the power of the whole of this reaction, so it's the main start point. Okay, so task 1. Have a go at seeing if you can use the keywords to help you write the reaction. Now that you know this, try and describe what's happening in this reaction. Leaves are adapted to be able to carry out photosynthesis, and their adaptations I've listed here for you. There's a large surface area. They're very thin, so they can have easy diffusion. Remember, they need to try and get that carbon dioxide into the leaf, and they need to get the oxygen out of the leaf. The leaf obviously has the chloroplasts, which contain the chlorophyll, allowing that reaction to take place. Remember that reaction, we've got the carbon dioxide coming in with the water, and that gives out the oxygen and glucose. The palisade cells at the top of the plant allows for that light to get into the plant, and it's packed full of those chloroplasts to trap the sunlight. It has a network of veins for transport of water and sugars. So the water and the sugars is going to come from the roots, from the soil, and it's going to come up through the stem to the leaves, and then transpiration will take it from the leaf into the air. The stomata allows that diffusion of the gas in and out, and those air spaces in that spongy layer allow the carbon dioxide to get in and the oxygen to leave. Leaves tend to be very broad and angled so they can get as maximum light as possible, and some trees and plants will have really large leaves in order to get the maximum photosynthesis, and also they have many leaves. Okay, so the leaves have stomata that allows the gas to diffuse into and out of the leaves. So remember, the carbon dioxide is going into the leaves and the oxygen is leaving out of the leaf. Okay, the two main areas that you need to understand is the palisade layer, which is underneath the waxy layer. This has the chloroplasts that obviously bring in the sun energy and allow photosynthesis to take place. We then have a spongy layer which has got air space in, and that allows the gas to go in and out through the stomata. And if you notice, they have guard cells by the stomata. These cells are what are in charge of opening and shutting that space to allow for that movement. of gases. So for task 2, just have a look at the diagram, see if you can label each part and look at the function. Down the bottom there's some descriptions. All you have to do is identify which section it is. So the first one contains cells packed with chloroplasts, where most of the plant's photosynthesis occurs. The second one is a description that contains airspace allowing carbon dioxide to diffuse throughout the leaf and oxygen to diffuse out of the leaf. Thirdly, carbon dioxide is diffused in and oxygen and water are diffused out. Which part is that? And then the last one, open the stomata through the day and close at night. Which part of it does that? Okay, so all plants need minerals to enable them to be able to do their job. So not only do they need those gases, they need water from the roots, and that water travels up, and as it travels up through the stem, it takes with it some of these minerals from the soil. So we're looking at magnesium, nitrates, phosphates and potassium. These allow the healthy growth of the leaves. Now farmers use fertiliser to replace the minerals in the soil, and that allows that growth to develop better. So thinking about the minerals that are required, have a look at this. If I have a deficiency, it means that something is not working right. Something is not getting to the plant. So see if you can identify here what is not getting to the plant. Is it the magnesium, the potassium, the nitrate or the phosphate? So what makes dead patches on leaves and yellow leaves? What makes poor growth and some of the leaves go yellow? What makes the poor root growth and some of the leaves turn purple? And what makes the yellow leaves? So, chemosynthesis is the idea of allowing organisms to live without using energy from the sunlight and not relying on other organisms for food. So some forms of bacteria use this chemical reaction in replace of photosynthesis. So sulfur bacteria, they can carry this out near volcanic sea vents, and nitrogen bacteria can carry this out from some of the roots of some plants. It's important that you understand that it allows living things to make more of themselves without using photosynthesis. So, chemosynthesis is the alternative to photosynthesis. For your assessment, you need to be able to really identify organisms that carry this out, where it happens, and a description of how it happens. If you can summarise chemosynthesis, that would be a really good idea at this point. So, aerobic respiration, what you need to know is that it's the transfer of energy stored in the food, okay, and the glucose and oxygen that reacts. So this is the opposite now to that photosynthesis equation, and the equation for this is that the glucose and oxygen makes carbon dioxide and water. The oxygen is transported in the hemoglobin of the red blood cells, and the carbon dioxide leaves via your circulatory system, okay, when you're breathing. So when we breathe in, we take in about 21% of the oxygen that's in the air. And when we breathe out, we only breathe out 18. So ultimately, only about 3% of the oxygen is getting into the cells, which is why we breathe constantly. So in order to make sure you can access those questions on the paper, you need to make sure that you can write the equation for aerobic respiration. So here is just a small task just to see if you can remember that equation. All you've got to do is input whether the keywords in bold to where they should be. So anaerobic respiration, this happens in the absence of oxygen. So the word equation still has the glucose, but this time you make lactic acid and the energy that you need. Fermentation is a type of anaerobic respiration. This is slightly different because it produces ethanol and carbon dioxide and that energy. both of which though take place with no oxygen. So anaerobic respiration is like a bank lending you some money. It lends you your money and you get into what we call an oxygen debt. And then when you can pay that back, when you're breathing heavily, you can then get the oxygen back into your cells. So if you've ever had a stitch, that's a build-up of lactic acid. Lactic acid builds up and the stitch will go once your oxygen debt has been repaid. So in order that you are ready for the assessment, you need to be able to write the anaerobic respiration. So have a go. Remember, there's no oxygen. Try and describe the differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So, food chains and food webs. A food chain shows how the organism eats and transfers energy. A food web is a set of linked food chains. Ultimately, the sun gives its energy to the plant, the producer. The producer is then able to make its own food, its own glucose store. An animal will then come along. That will be the primary consumer. That primary consumer will then eat the grass, and the energy from the grass is then passed on to that primary consumer. A secondary consumer will then come along, normally a carnivore. That carnivore will then eat that primary consumer. The primary consumer will then transfer its energy to the secondary consumer. And in some cases, there may be another consumer after that, a tertiary consumer. The top person is normally the predator. They're the ones that eat other animals. The prey is the ones that are being eaten. Generally, the ones that eat the producer tend to be a herbivore because they only eat grass and other plant matter. So in this task, all I'm asking you to do is to look at how you would represent a food chain. So have a go at creating a food chain with these organisms. The nettles are the producer, barn owl, which eats voles, a caterpillar, which eats nettles, and a field vole, which eats caterpillars. What would that look like? This task is just to help you identify what the word interdependence means. So, have a look. Fill in the gaps in the paragraph below. Some of the keywords are shown. Interdependence, population and food web. But not all of the words are there, so you may have to think of your own words that would fit into this sentence. Interdependence means the way in which living organisms depend on each other to survive, grow and reproduce. Organisms in A depend on each other for survival. They are the number of animals in the plant of the same type that live in the same area is called the population size of one type of organism has a direct effect on the size of another type of population. In this food web, the rabbit has one predator. Its predator is A. If the number of rabbits due to a disease, the number of foxes would also, as they would have less to eat. So it's important to understand that in food chains and food webs, sometimes things can disturb the flow. So the disruption to food chains and food webs is when something changes that affects the predator-prey relationship. So organisms in a food web depend on each other. This is called the interdependence. When it changes, it can affect the organism itself, and it can affect the population size, and it can affect the overall food web. Toxic chemicals can pass through the food chain, and this can eventually cause organisms to become ill and die. This is called a bioaccumulation. And if this happens and one part of the food chain is affected, then this can stop the food chain from working productively. Bioaccumulation is the idea that a chemical can move through a food chain. So if each leaf in this diagram receives 1 dose of DDT, which is an insecticide, and it's been sprayed on by farmers. If the worms eat 3 leaves, they receive 3 doses. If the robin then eats 2 worms and a sparrowhawk then eats 2 robins, how many doses of DDT does the sparrowhawk eat? Remember to think about what's happening to the number as it goes through the food chain. This will help you to understand interdependence in organisms and how toxic materials can accumulate. Did you get the answer? The answer, in fact, is 12. So 3 to the worms, the bird eats 2 worms, that's 6, and then the sparrowhawk is eating 2 of the smaller birds and therefore getting 12 in total. In an ecosystem, we can show bioaccumulation by showing a food chain and showing the toxic waste moving through the food chain. Have a go at completing this task. Using the keywords at the top, see if you can fill this in. In a food chain, is the producer. The area is with toxic waste. The algae each contain levels of toxins. The nymph eats lots of algae. The eats lots of nymphs. The eats lots of fish, and the levels of toxin then build up through the food chain. This is because the bigger the organism eats lots of the smaller organisms. The herons can consume levels of toxins. This is called... So what you need to know for the assessment is that an ecosystem is the name of the plants, animals, and the location that they live in. The area the organism lives in is the habitat. All the plants and animals that coexist together live in that same habitat is part of that whole ecosystem. An organism in an ecosystem has its own niche, its own sort of area within the ecosystem. So let's test. How observant are you? Have a look at this image and study it for 2 minutes, and then see if you are ready to answer the next 5 questions on the next slide. Ultimately, you need to take in as much information as you possibly can. So, question number 1. How many birds are flying in the sky? Question 2. How many lions are lying down? Question 3. How many elephants are there? Question 4. What direction are the zebra facing? And question 5. How many trees were there in the image? Be interesting to see how many of these you can get right. So here, let's find out if you got all of these right. How many birds there were flying in the sky? 5. How many trees were there in the image? 2. How many elephants were there? 3. Did you spot the baby? What direction were the zebra facing? They're looking to the left. And how many lions were lying down? There's 1 lying down. So, for your assessment, you need to be able to describe how different organisms coexist within an ecosystem and identify niches within the ecosystems. So these will be sections where there are small food chains. So have a go at filling in these gaps. And is the name given to the plants and animals that are found in a particular location and an area where they live? These plants and animals depend on each other to survive. The organisms in an ecosystem are known as. The area they live in is called a. For example, in an oak tree ecosystem is the habitat. The community is made of different organisms that live in the oak tree. For example, birds and squirrels. The organism in a community and the habitat, this means they live in the same place at the same time. So Year 8, that was the revision of the ecosystems processes topic. Hopefully you're all set now for your assessment. On the next 2 slides, I've put the answers to the tasks and questions that were asked throughout the PowerPoint. So if you're not quite ready to go through the answers, you need to pause the video now. If you are ready, then please click on to the next slide and hopefully you'll get them all right. Don't forget to mark your work and make sure you make any corrections that need to be done. So here are the answers to the tasks. For task 1, plants use photosynthesis to make their food. We know that the photosynthesis uses light to convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen. So your equation should have looked like this. Carbon dioxide plus water produces glucose and oxygen with the help from light. For task 2, the order is the palisade layer, the spongy layer, stomata and the guard cells. For task 3, the order should have been, down the table, potassium, nitrate, phosphorus and magnesium. For task 4, in aerobic respiration, oxygen is inhaled and glucose from the food react to form water and carbon dioxide. This transfers energy. Carbon dioxide is exhaled as a waste product. For aerobic respiration, oxygen and glucose make water and carbon dioxide and allowing energy to happen. Anaerobic respiration just uses glucose and lactic acid is produced and again the energy. So for task 5, your food chain should have looked like this. We should have started with the nettles, that is the producer, and they produce their own glucose and store that. They transferred their energy to the caterpillar, the primary consumer, a herbivore, who then transfers their energy to the field vole, the secondary consumer, and a carnivore, who then pass their energy to the barn owl. The barn owl is the tertiary consumer, also a carnivore. He would be the top predator here, whereas the caterpillar would be the prey. And the field vole would be the prey for the barn owl. In task 6, the order would be food web, interdependent, food web, fox, decreases. For task 7, bioaccumulation, the order should be algae, polluted, low, fish, heron, high, bioaccumulation. And the ecosystems keywords, the order for that is ecosystem, community, habitat, oak tree, woodlice, coexist. If there's any that you've got wrong, go back and have another look.